Okay, so this is the video lecture for the native plant talk. We have to think about what the definition of a native plant is. So how long does a plant have to be in a region before it's considered native? Is that 200 years, 500 years, 1,000 years, 10,000 years? How do we know? Because plants move around. Their seeds get blown to different areas, their seeds get stuck in animals and they get moved. How do you know when a plant is a native plant? Could we arbitrarily pick a time? Of course we could. We could say if it was here 200 years ago, then it's native. We could say if it's 500 years ago, then it's native. Well, what if we use geopolitical boundaries instead? So if it's in the state of Ohio and it's not in the state of Indiana, then it's native to Ohio. We could do that, but what about a plant that sits on the border? Or a plant that's on one side of the border and on the other side of the border? Do plants even care about borders? We call it Canadian hemlock. Is it really Canadian? Do we have populations in the United States that are native? So those are challenges that we have to deal with when trying to decide on a definition for a native plant. And then how do you deal with ecotypes? An ecotype is a plant that has a very wide range, but each individual is only specific to that particular area. So let's look at red maple, for example. Red maples will grow from Maine all the way to northern Florida, from the Mississippi River all the way to the East Coast. But if you take the red maples from Florida and you try to grow them in Ohio, they don't grow. They're technically the same species, but they don't grow. So the types that are from Florida are pretty much exclusive to that area. So is it still a native plant? Is it an Ohio native, even though we have red maples that are native to Ohio? So this is kind of personal preference. There's almost no right or wrong answer to this. If you are working with a client and she wants to have genetic stock native to Ohio, then I think it's possible for you to find plants that are genetically from native Ohio plants. If you are more of the type that says it's native to North America and I'm good with that, then that's fine too. So there's always going to be a little bit of controversy over this. We do have an official definition, and that definition is a plant that was here since European colonization. Now, there are challenges with that. It completely ignores the fact that there were thousands of people living in this country before Europeans colonized the country, and they were utilizing plants, and they were moving plants around and planting plants and doing all sorts of things with them. It starts us at a point of time that could be troublesome. However, the Europeans did have records of what they brought over, and they started keeping records of what they found here. So it is a point to start a conversation. It's nothing more than that. Now that we kind of know, quote unquote, what a native plant is, so what's an exotic plant then? Non-native, obviously. Alien, maybe that's another term for it. Introduced is probably a better word. In other words, the plant was brought to a country either on purpose or accidentally. These could be wild plants, they could be cultivated plants, they could have been brought here for any number of reasons. Now, sometimes we say we naturalize. We talked about that with the bulbs a little bit, where daffodils will naturalize, meaning they propagate themselves and they get bigger and bigger clumps. And that's exactly what this means. A plant that is spreading and reproducing on its own. They're almost always considered exotic plants, but they're now here. They may have escaped cultivation, and you can find them growing in our woods. Norway maple would be a classic example of that. You can find Norway maples growing in our woods, behaving as native plants, despite the fact that they are not. This is a term, wildflower, that gets thrown around a lot. It's basically any flowering plant. They're usually herbaceous, and these could be either introduced or native plants. This one's a little bit easier. What's an invasive plant? What does a plant have to do to become invasive? Well, it has to be capable of reproducing quickly. It has to have a very high seed germination rate. It has to be capable of displacing other plants, adaptable to a wide range of conditions, and very, very difficult to kill. You guys have probably all seen these types of plants. Think of Canada thistle and how hard that plant is to kill. From an invasive plant perspective, purple loosestrife is probably the poster child for this. Look at it, it's beautiful. It's got these wonderful pink flowers, grows just about any place. It'll take wet, dry, sun, partial shade, and then it makes these fields like this. There's hardly anything else there. There's not a lot of diversity there. There's not a lot of insects there. You don't find a lot of animals there. It can dry the ground out and take a wetland and turn it into a dryland. And it's basically gone on the rampage and taken all the space from everything else. This is from the University of Georgia's website, and I put this in here because it gives you an idea of how tall this plant can be. So it has the ability to choke out lots and lots of other things. Kudzu, they call it the plant that ate the South. Go online, you'll find all of these pictures online. You'll see lots and lots of pictures of kudzu eating things, and it has the ability to grow 18 feet a day under lab conditions. It doesn't grow that well in the wild, but it grows really, really fast. You might be talking 20 or 25 feet a year. That's a fast growing plant. It's aggressive, it climbs, it chokes everything out. So that was, and we brought that one to this country as a forage crop. This was brought, Melaleuca was brought to the Florida Everglades as a way to dry out the Everglades, and it did that very, very well, but now we can't get rid of it. It's all over the place. And this is what it looks like. You can see all of those dead trees are Melaleucas, and when you are a tree that lives in the Everglades, how do you get rid of them? Somebody has to physically go into the Everglades and kill all of the trees individually. There was a great Dirty Jobs episode about that many years ago when that show was on, about how they would go up to these trees, girdle them, and then spray them with an herbicide. But if you're in the Everglades and you're tromping through the Everglades, what's in the Everglades? Alligators. So yes, you have to send people into alligator-infested areas to kill these trees individually. And our native plants can sometimes escape and run wild and behave as invasive plants. Anybody who's ever dealt with poison ivy knows that the stuff gets all over the place. But poison ivy likes disturbance. If you go into a mature forest that has not had disturbance, you don't find as much poison ivy. Poison ivy loves the activities that human beings do. We build houses, we till gardens, we cut down trees, we plant trees. We do all kinds of things that gives perfect environment for poison ivy to take off. You know what this plant is? Would you consider it an invasive plant? Now here in Ohio, we certainly don't consider it an invasive plant, but they can be. In the right conditions, you take that poinsettia and you throw it out the window, and it gets into the ground and roots and becomes these trees. These are poinsettias, that little tiny thing that you get at Christmas time. Read through this list. You'll find that there's lots and lots of positive things here. Obviously, these are all pros. All of these things are pros of native plants. You could probably come up with 100 reasons why a person would want to plant native plants. You could probably come up with 100 reasons why a person might not want to plant native plants. Maybe they're harder to find in the trade. Maybe they are in danger of extinction. If you look at lady slippers, that's a problem. If you take them out of their natural environment, they may not perform as well. So there's some challenges, perhaps, of having native plants. What about exotic plants? Exotic plants can be expensive. Exotic plants can be cheap. They can be readily available. They might be hard to find. They might have decreased disease or insect problems because the insects that are here don't know about those plants. So these are all possible positives of having exotic plants. They look kind of similar to the ones for native plants, as do some of the cons. Now, I do think we have a duty to ensure that if we're bringing in a plant for an ornamental purpose, and that's the only purpose we're bringing it in, we should probably investigate whether or not that plant has the ability to escape in our climate. Because we don't want to be the ones responsible for bringing in something else that's going to run amok in our habitats. The answer will always be right plant, right place. If you do your research, then the plants that you put in your landscapes, in your gardens, or recommend to people coming to your greenhouse, your garden center, your florist shop, all of those things, those plants will perform better. If you understand what the plant wants and the environment that it needs, it will do better. If natives are not used properly, they will not perform. If exotics are not used properly, they will not perform. So we have a duty to ensure that our imports don't do any more environmental damage. Basically, it boils down to do your research and your landscapes will reward you. So it's going to be a little bit of controversy with this no matter what. Again, they may provide a solution, native plants might, exotic plants might provide the solution. It's important for us as land stewards to be aware of the impact that we have on our landscapes and the possible escaping that might happen with our plants, but it's also important for us to make sure that our clients are happy. And if your clients want native plants, give them native plants. If your clients don't care, give them whatever they want in their landscapes. As always, if you have any questions, do not hesitate to ask.